Welcome back to another episode of the Think Deeper podcast. I'm your co-host, Will Harrop, joined by Jack and Joe Wilkie. We are excited to delve further into the topic of discussion that we started last week, kind of about recent cultural trends in the evangelical community. So we'll provide a quick recap of what we talked about last week, and then, of course, we'll delve into the stuff that we have lined up for this week. But before we do that, we wanted to talk about something that we are super excited about coming up this weekend. Actually, if you happen to be one of our listeners that is from the Southern California area or are close to Victorville, I think that's about an hour outside of LA or something like that. The three of us are going to be speaking at the first ever Think Deeper seminar at the Victor Valley Church of Christ in Victorville, California. The three of us could not be more excited about it. Of course, if you listen to our podcast, you know that we enjoy talking to each other. You know, we enjoy talking about cultural events, of course, how those things relate to God's word and really how we as Christians are supposed to live. And I mean, it's fun doing it over Zoom and, recording a podcast, but for the three of us to get to do it in person at a seminar, I'm really, really excited about it. And so if you do happen to be in the Southern California area, come join us. It'll be Friday through Sunday at the Victor Valley Church of Christ. But if you're not in the Southern California area and you're like, man, I'd really like to hear that, talk to your elders and schedule a Think Deeper seminar. We would love to come out and have one of these for your congregation. And as far as topics go, with the way that we did it with this congregation is kind of like, hey, what would you like us to talk about? We have a lot of things, of course, that we cover with this podcast. And so we go a lot of different directions, but we've talked about it before. If you are interested or have any questions about maybe scheduling a Think Deeper seminar with the three of us, let us know. Reach out to us, message Jack on Facebook, or message the Facebook page, hit us up on email or whatever it may be. But we are super excited to be in Victorville this upcoming weekend, September, what is that? I think 9th through the 10th, or 9th through the 11th, or something like that.
8th through 10th. 8th is the Friday night it starts.
There you go, 8th through the 10th. And so I'm looking forward to that. I think that's all we have to talk about to start this week's episode. Again, this is going to be a part 2, tying very heavily into last week's episode. So if you did not get a chance to listen to last week's episode, that's fine. It will give you a little bit more context as to what we're talking about this week. I am going to hand it over to Jack to kind of give a real quick recap of what we talked about last week.
And Jack, before you do, just real fast so our listeners can hear, what sort of things are we talking about? Can you give them a brief overview? You don't have to tell them everything, but just what sort of things are we talking about at the seminar? Just because they may say, we like listening to you, but like, what exactly are you providing? Sure. Just give them a quick recap and then roll that into the recap of last week.
Yeah, they wanted us to talk about some of the church and church family things. We did an arc last summer, summer 2022, on my book, Church Reset, and church family and the involvement of every member and things like that. But we're going to go different directions, problem solving, some of the strain of families in the church and things like that. So things that, we all kind of bring our own different expertise, different things that we focus on, study more heavily. Joe with conflict resolution and things from the counseling and therapy world, Will with family and younger folk stuff and things like that. And so we're just going to blend all of that into just a stronger church kind of topics. And so they picked a really good slate. Really looking forward to getting to meet the folks out there. And again, anybody in the area, come on out. All right. So to recap briefly, we spoke last week about these trends in evangelicalism going back to the 70s and 80s, really the rise of the megachurch thing. We talked about some big names that you may or may not be familiar with: Bill Hybels, Rick Warren, Tim Keller, Andy Stanley. And again, to establish this, like 98% of our audience is Church of Christ members. This is relevant to us because as I was thinking about it this morning and thinking about what we had covered and what we're going to cover, Bill Hybels' model of church is like the dominant model. Like, that's everybody across denomination is looking to grow in the way that he set up programs and events and just the calendar and everything that a church kind of puts on, quote unquote. A lot of it stems back to Bill Hybels and Willow Creek in Illinois. And so there's that influence there. There's Rick Warren, purpose-driven life, purpose-driven church, and how much influence he's had. And Tim Keller, so many preachers subscribe to the Tim Keller School of Cultural Engagement. And we talked about that in the neutral world and how it kind of worked for a while, but even then it wasn't a good strategy. And that leads to the Andy Stanley School of Engagement, which is just keep apologizing to the world and telling them how terrible Christians are and kind of beating up on the church to try and look cool to the world. And so we covered that. Then we covered the emerging church movement, which was an overreaction of the early 2000s of saying church got too big, too business-like. Let's kind of strip away all of the fences and boundaries and just make it all relational, all individual, all subjective to what every person wants to bring to the table and what every person wants to believe, really stripping down creeds and doctrines and predictably it drifted into nothingness because there were no guardrails. There was no point at which they said, okay, you can't believe that and be part of the church. And so, as was mentioned, one of the very biggest names of the emerging church movement, Brian McLaren, Will brought up the man preached his own son's gay wedding a few years ago. I mean, like it just drift all the way off the map. And so we looked at those movements, where they ended up. We've got some smaller, I guess, more niche, more specific ones we're going to get to this time. We're going to start with one more really big one. It was around, I don't know, it was like a more central version, kind of splitting the difference between traditional Christianity and the emergent thing. It was Crazy Love by Francis Chan, Radical by David Platt. The Matt Chandler had a book in there as well that was very popular that I'm drawing a blank on the title of, but sold millions and millions and millions of copies, and very good books in their own way to a degree. We're always spit out the bones, people. We don't agree with everything. I'm going to say to their credit, Francis Chan and David Platt are both baptism for the remission of sins guys, and they have been some of the loudest critics of the sinner's prayer in the denominational world. So let's give them that credit, even though we disagree with them on a lot of things. Maybe more so all the time. We'll get to in a minute. But let's talk about what those books introduced. What ideas came out of them? The good ideas that came out of them were American Christianity has become stale. It's become incredibly lukewarm. We've got to do more. You weren't meant to just go to church for an hour a week and call it good. There's got to be some more behind there. So I think we've both read one all three of us have read one or both of the books, correct?
Yeah, I've read Crazy Love. I have not read Radical.
All right. Joe?
I've read both.
Okay.
I haven't read the Matt Chandler one, but yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know why. I'm going to have to look it up here when I pass this off. But there were a lot of books in that vein, but those were the two biggest ones, Radical and Crazy Love. And so what kind of came out of that, I guess, is what we're going to talk about here.
I think Not a Fan from Kyle Idleman was another big one that was going around that was in the same vein, which was, again, another good book. But yeah, so the key to this movement, as you talked about, is getting away from lukewarm Christianity. So I think Francis Chan, at the height of his quote unquote power, I think he had like 9,000 people at his Simi Valley church, said, this isn't what God intended, to have this big of a church. I don't want to be the leader of the church. And so he just up and moved his family to, I think, Myanmar, one of the East Asian, like those East Asian countries, maybe Malaysia, Myanmar, something like that. And basically faded into obscurity. It was pretty interesting. And that's really what he was pushing for in Crazy Love, is kind of doing these crazy things. And Radical is the same thing, of doing radical things for Christ. And so if that means giving up all your possessions and, going to serve the homeless in San Francisco, which he literally did, then that's what we need to do. If that means that you leave your lucrative job and, yes, you're taking care of your family, but you leave your lucrative job so you can go serve in Africa, then that's what you need to do if you're feeling called to do those things. And so there was a strong emphasis on doing things for God, and not just things, doing radical things for God, and leaving behind everything you've known and getting away from kind of the American consumerism and moving into like these steadily increasingly extreme things, such as just up and moving to Asia. So there was a lot of, like, you read that and you go, whoa, this is incredible. They're talking about all these prayers that are answered and all these things that are happening. And I think people genuinely wanted to experience that. It almost had a feel of like a camp feel, if that makes sense. So where all the emotions are heightened and everything, you go, this is incredible. God's in this place. God is working.
Spiritual high.
And,
right.
Yes. And so the stories that they tell were very much the spiritual high. Like, I want that. And if I have to chase that by leaving everything that I know, then that's what I'm going to do.
So again, I did not read Radical. Read Crazy Love, I think, when I was 16 or 17. And at the time when I came away from reading that, I was like, that's one of the best books I've ever read. And I still think it's a great book. Francis Chan does a great job in that book of describing and really communicating, first of all, the idea of we don't fully grasp how much God loves us and how, well, basically why that's such a big deal. The fact that he's the creator of the universe and he created literally everything around us, and yet he chooses to love us. So he communicated that very well. And then he also communicated very well, to Joe's point, the lukewarmness of the modern state of Christianity. And I think that's one of the biggest pros with the book, is that modern day, even in the Church of Christ, Christendom, so to speak, is a very, for the most part, selfish Christianity is what I would call it. It's the theological minimalism of what is the least amount that I have to do to kind of keep my way of life and keep, my life of luxury, and basically what's the least amount that I have to sacrifice. That's what most people, unfortunately, that's their mindset towards Christianity. And man, Francis Chan turned that upside down on its head. And so I think that is one of the biggest pros of the book, is that it promoted a very selfless view of Christianity, a very selfless view of serving God. And so I remember, in fact, coming away from reading that feeling super guilty, because he does talk about, and he pushes the idea of selling your possessions and
the rich
kind of
young
giving
ruler,
up,
right?
Yeah, giving up everything, you brought up the job and stuff like that. And so I don't know how much more we want to kind of go over what the tenets of these books are versus going ahead and getting into maybe where they fall short. So I guess the first question that I'll ask is, because of course I have my answer on it, but again, one of the things that was very present in Crazy Love, and I'm sure Radical as well, kind of the idea that if you're not going out and serving on a mission field, if you're not giving up everything that you have to go serve the poor and go do this and that, if you're not doing those things, basically that you're kind of less of a Christian. And so it promoted the idea that, hey, every single Christian should go serve on the mission field. And I don't even know if he ever came out and said that, but that was certainly the implication that I got from reading the book, is that every Christian should aspire to go serve on the mission field. Every Christian should aspire to, again, go sell their possessions and go serve the poor, to give up the nice job, leave the suburban neighborhood, pull your kids out of private school, like all the nice things that we enjoy. Kind of the idea that, hey, every Christian should strive towards constant ministry, constant missionary, focus. Guys, how do we feel about that? That's, I guess, the first question that I wanted to ask. Of course, again, I've got my thoughts on that, but to open it up to you guys, that's the implication that a lot of people got from reading, certainly Crazy Love. Again, I don't want to speak too much to Radical because I didn't read that one. But yeah, that's the feeling that he left you with after reading the book is, hey, if I'm not doing that, I'm a lukewarm Christian.
I want you to answer that. I want you to answer that.
I'm just going to say this. Radical took it farther than Crazy Love. Would you agree with that, Joe, having read both?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
It did. Yeah, no, what I was going to say is, and I mentioned it briefly earlier, that rich young ruler, there is, I wouldn't say hints of this. I mean, they really did build it, because you go, wow, that's kind of crazy. We're going to talk about that in a second. But to what do you call it? Strongman, like the
Steel Man.
What do you call it when you're building?
Steel Man.
Thank you. I always think of Iron Man. It's not Iron Man. I know that. But Iron Man's great too. Anyway,
to drawing a stark contrast here, right?
Oh, okay. Nice. The rich young ruler is kind of one of their big, hey, you got all these possessions. That's the average American coming to Jesus. And what do you think Jesus would say to the average American? Maybe give up your possessions, follow him. You go, wow, that sounds very religious. Like, that sounds very good, like spiritual. That should be the good thing. People coming to Jesus, hey, how about you give up, like, don't even go tell your parents bye, basically. Like, the man who looks back isn't fit for the plow type of thing. Like, there's all these things of Jesus calling people to this. And so you can read it and very easily make the conclusion, these guys are spot on. We need to do those things. We're going to pump the brakes on that. Jack, I'm going to let you take that, because I think there's more to life than just leaving behind everything and going to the mission field in Myanmar or whatever. But Jack, get us into maybe some of the struggles with this.
So this is the way I was thinking it, and this helped me kind of formulate my argument against some of these things, and maybe it'll help other people. Maybe I'm going to come across like a nerd here or something. You watch Star Wars as a kid. Man, I want to be Luke Skywalker. I want to be Obi-Wan. I want to be, whichever Jedi. You want to be Yoda, whatever it may be. But when you realize in these fictional worlds you enter, there's a bazillion people and there's 3 Jedi, right? There's 3 main characters or whatever. And you're focused on the main characters that if I was in that world, I would not be Luke Skywalker. I'd be the guy that he walks past in the street, like that. That's it. In the same way, we kind of read the New Testament like, well, Paul did this and Jesus did this and Peter did this. And there's a lot of that we're supposed to emulate. Not all of it. Okay. I mean, the idea of an apostle going from place to place, you look at the difference between Paul and Timothy. Timothy was, hey man, stay in this city and work with these people. You weren't supposed to. Timothy wasn't supposed to be Paul. Timothy wasn't supposed to sell all of his stuff and go journey all over and be beaten and thrown in prison, all these things. If push came to shove in Ephesus, he was supposed to be willing to do that, but that wasn't his life. But then you remove it one layer further. You're not Timothy either. You're the guy in Timothy's church who Timothy is teaching to be a husband and a father, and that's okay. That's a normal life that every Christian, because as the gospel spreads, you need Paul's, you need Timothy's, but what they create is churches full of people who aren't Paul's and Timothy's, and that's just fine.
Essentially what you're saying, and people are going to hate to hear this, is we're not all on the same playing field.
Right. We don't all have the same job here. And so with the radical crazy love, explicit gospel was the Matt Chandler one. I finally looked it up. Not a fan. All of these things. There's another critique I have. These all are an outworking of the work of John Piper. All of those guys say they are big, fans of, influenced by John Piper, who is massively influential. And again, this is one of those, I'm in the Church of Christ. I don't listen to your preacher does. All of my preacher buddies had a John Piper phase. Some of them still big John Piper people. I had a John Piper phase because he says a lot of stuff that does. He's got some great stuff. Yeah. I need to grow closer to God. And his book was called Desiring God. And it was this long, flowery book about you need to desire God more. Here's the problem with John Piper's work that comes out in these guys' work. You're constantly what is, you're going to have to help me, Joe, with his Christian hedonism principle is God is most glorified with me when I am most satisfied in him. Right. And so you're constantly asking, am I enjoying God enough? Have I done enough? Have I done enough? Like, I went to church, but I didn't really feel connected enough. So man, I don't know that I'm really close to it. It's constant self-flagellation. It's kind of what, Will, you said when you came away from reading that book is guilty. I'm guilty. Right. Like I got to do more. I got to do more. I got to do more. It's never enough. It's never. And it's almost like this approach some people have to fitness or whatever. Some of those David Goggins, Jocko Willink guys of, I just got to beat myself into the ground. You really don't. Okay. And as a Christian, you don't have to go over the top, just ridiculous and I want to say this to our listeners. If you are being a husband and father or mother and wife, or as a single Christian, or as a younger Christian who's growing up, and where you are in your school, in your workplace, in whatever it is you're doing in life, you're trying to live out and be submissive to God and how he would have you do things. That's enough. He's enough. You have God. You don't need to be looking around going, I just don't think I've done enough. I need to give up more. I need to give up. And that's what these books, there was that guilt. And a lot of people did. A lot of people went onto the mission field. A lot of people just, I got to do something. I got to do something great for God. No, you don't. You got to raise a family faithfully. Just do that.
I've got two critiques that I wanted to talk about, and that kind of hits on one of them, is that it's just simply human nature that is going to be unsustainable. You're going to get burned out if that's something that is the focus and the emphasis behind every single Christian's life. That's not an excuse for us to just sit back on our lives of luxury and never sacrifice or never serve or never be mission-minded, nothing like that. But if you make the focus, if you make, hey, this is essentially what you have to do if you want to be a quote unquote legitimate Christian, it's going to result in burned out people. It's going to, it is the gym thing of like, I've got to go and I got to lift, I got to do 50-pound curls every single day for the rest of my life and never stop. Good luck with that. You're not going to be able to do that because that's unsustainable. And so that was one of the critiques that I had with this whole movement is, sounds great. As Joe said, like you read it and you're like, yeah, that lines up in a lot of ways with what I see and what I should be doing. It is unsustainable. It does ignore the biblical principles of lead your quiet life, mind your own business, work with your hands, provide for your family, take care of your family. Where does that fit into this whole, abandon your job and go serve in the mission field type of thing? Again, I'm not saying that somebody can't do that, but it was kind of this one size fits all approach that every Christian should be this way, that I just didn't see as sustainable. The other, and Joe, you can comment on that if you want, but the other thing I wanted to bring up before I hand it off to you, Joe, is it reminds me of, we had a great comment from one of our Focus Plus subscribers for our Deep End segment on, trying to remember which episode it was, but basically it was the idea that should the church use their giving more, their contribution more to basically take care of those who were less fortunate in their congregations, basically that the wealthier in the congregation give more to take care of those who were poorer. And I might be butchering, kind of what the guy was saying, but that was the premise that I took away from it. And what we pointed out in our Deep End segment in response to that is it's not the role of the church. It's not the role of Christians to make, I guess, giving to make other people more wealthy is not the point of being a Christian and giving. And I think that's the other thing about this movement, that it kind of had a misunderstanding of poverty, misunderstanding of wealth, of this idea that, well, if we just gave more, it would alleviate human suffering, and the world would be better if we just gave more money. I don't think that that's necessarily the case. Again, if ideally we'd all be socialists, right? And everybody would just be, but that's not real life. That's not how things work. And obviously that's a failed economic system. And so I think it gave a false idea of giving. It gave a false idea of generosity. Of course we should be generous, and of course we should be charitable, but to act like that's the one solution to everything is just sell all you have and give to the poor. That to me, that reflects a poor understanding of the biblical value of being generous and giving. So, Joe, I don't know if you want to comment on both of those, but those were kind of the two critiques I wanted to bring up about this.
Yeah, to both of your points, we need Christian plumbers, we need Christian secretaries, we need Christian school teachers. We definitely need we need Christian lawyers. We need Christians in their workplaces, because if everybody leaves for the mission field, like maybe your mission field is where you're working. Maybe, and to both of your points there, I think you guys said it really well. So I don't want to beat the dead horse there, but we really need Christians to be okay with where they're at, where they're not doing great things for the Lord. You raising a family and really focusing on multi-generational faithfulness
is doing a great thing for the Lord. Yeah.
It is the greatest thing, because it says, your dad says, you know what? Noah didn't convert a single person, got his family on the boat. That's so key to think about, that our job is to get the family on the boat, so to speak. And yes, if we can evangelize and whatnot. So to that point, the second thing I would say is spiritual gifts are a thing. It's the same thing we talk about. Not everybody is given the spiritual gift to get up and preach and to teach. Not everybody's given a spiritual gift to encourage, even though everybody wants to use that one, right? Not everybody's given the spiritual gift to go out and evangelize, or the spiritual gift of faith. And you see some people. So if you feel called to go serve in the mission field in Africa, and this is something that you've prayed a lot about, you've experienced some crazy things where God really seems to be leading you. Hey, we are not here to tell you, don't do it. We need you here. Hey, go do it. That's fantastic if God is doing it. However, to me, that's the exception. That's not what everybody's getting. Some people have that gift that they can go and do that. That is very difficult work. So yes, it leads toward burnout. To your point, Will, it leads toward people going into the mission field and then getting really depressed. And they're not, that doesn't make for good mission work either. It's not that missionaries can't be depressed from time to time, but you know what I mean? Make sure that you're recognizing your spiritual gift in this. And I think if we recognize that and spent some time really discussing that with one another, it wouldn't be so tempting to have to go do these great things of faith. It would be like, you know what? I know who I am. I know what I'm about. I know my spiritual gift in my small church here in Oklahoma, Texas, Tennessee, wherever it may be. And that's really what's needed of me right now, is to help my family and to help the church in this area. I think that would have alleviated a lot of this radical, crazy love. We've got to go do crazy things out there if we really knew what we were about.
I think we also missed something on the be like Jesus part. Jesus was here for 33 years for a reason. He wasn't here to set up a family. He wasn't here for long-term to put down roots. He was here to accomplish that purpose. We're not here for that same thing. Where we do emulate Jesus is being submitted to the Father in all things, but that means different things for different people. That doesn't mean everybody needs to go to the cross or do all the things that he did. And so being like him doesn't mean exactly. It means taking the principle and applying it. And what happens is we get stuck on evangelism, mission. To what end? What about the next generation? What about 100 years from now? And this movement has really missed that. And that's why I wanted to get to, before we got out at this one, the kind of a where are they now segment. David Platt fell big time for wokeism. Was driving anti-woke people out of his church, did a church coup kind of power struggle thing over the BLM movement. Francis Chan, he's kind of gone off the grid. There are rumors that he's gone a little bit charismatic. It's really hard to say. And to his credit, he never wanted to be celebrity church mega pastor guy. And so he's really shied away from that. I think that is a notch in his honor, but I don't really know what to say of him. Matt Chandler, he's had a scandal. He also went super woke. A lot of the Jared Wilson, there's a lot of these names that are kind of...
Consider the fruits is what you're saying.
Yeah, around this. And because it didn't have a long-term plan, because this was always built to burn out, it wasn't sustainable, as you guys have said. It wasn't. 10 years later, it's not really a thing anymore. Will, did you have something?
Well, yeah, I want to bring up where I see this leaking into the Church of Christ. And I have brought this up before. It's one of the things that I harp on. It's tied into Joe's point, but we are so, with our programs, with our camps, with so many things, evangelism, evangelism, evangelism. Go baptize, baptize, baptize. And that is the big push. We should evangelize. We should be looking to baptize people. But why are we doing that to the neglect and to the detriment of discipling our families? That's what's so maddening to me, is that we've got all these camps, all these programs, all these lectureships about how do we go out and evangelize? How do we go out and evangelize? How do we go out and convert people and baptize people? That's great. That's something that's needed and valuable. Where are the lectureships and where are the conferences and where are the camps about this is how, as a dad, you raise faithful kids. This is how, as a mom, you make sure that for the 18 years that you have your kids, you can make sure that you're going to do everything you can to help them stay faithful. My mom, one of her greatest quotes when people ask why she doesn't do more speaking and, things like that, missionary stuff, she said, my kids are my mission field. And I think that that's such a good point about, like, you can do all the evangelizing, all the missionary stuff that to your heart's content. If you lose your kids, kind of negates your influence, so to speak. It kind of undoes a lot of that work. And again, I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't go out and evangelize. I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't be mission minded again, or that we shouldn't try to baptize people. But I think the Church of Christ needs a much stronger focus on this is how you raise your kids to be faithful. This is how you disciple your family. This is how you multi-generational faithfulness, as we brought up. This is how you bring about passing the faith on to the next generation through the kids that you have versus, well, let me see how many different people I can go evangelize to when we're losing families, when we're losing our kids. That's, to me, what one of the most frustrating things is. And to me, it's kind of an arm of this movement of everything's got to be out there. Everything's got to be way over there overseas. What about in your own home? What about making sure your kids are remaining faithful while you're shipping them off to public school where they're having their faith eroded? You're worried about, well, how can I go evangelize to people? You got that backwards. Again, evangelism is important, but not at the expense of you raising your kids to be faithful.
Well, Jack's point was perfect of, like, to what end? We evangelize. At some point, somebody has to be the Christian plumber. Somebody's, you know what I mean? Like, at some point, somebody's going to have to learn to live in the world and not just above the world. And that's really where, and that sounds terrible to say of evangelism, but I think we can have that high-minded view of it. But it's so good, Will, and I love that. I don't know if you want to call it rant, soapbox. That was brilliant, because the other thing is it pushes us right into our next one. If we're good,
I want to say one other thing, though, as to how this manifests in the Church of Christ. I forgot this point.
Sure.
What grew out of this was the term gospel issue. That's not a gospel issue. Why didn't they talk about all these other things? Well, we need to stay focused on the gospel. They had a conference. I don't know if it fell apart when they all kind of parted ways, or if maybe it's still going, but it's called Together for the Gospel. And it was always evangelism, discipleship, mission, all that stuff. And it did not get into these nitty gritty practical things of life that we've talked about before. Like, the Proverbs don't exist to these people, because the Proverbs are about, like, hey, here's what you do with your money and with your kids and your life, like all this stuff.
It's not a gospel issue. Right.
It's not a gospel issue. So we're not going to talk about it. So when we at Focus Press get into the things we talk about that a lot of our deep thinkers enjoy and are thankful that we do, because they say, man, this isn't talked about anywhere else. Why isn't it talked about anywhere else? It's not a gospel issue. It's in the Bible. Okay. Like, it is submission to Christ. It's part of it. But that is one of the terms that came out of this, is let's just stay focused on the gospel. Let's not get distracted by politics. Let's not get distracted by culture or any of these things. They're trying to turn your kids trans, man. That's a gospel issue. I'm sorry. Like, you can't just categorize things and go, we're not going to touch that one. You have to. Okay. And because they didn't, they were ripe for the picking for wokeism, because they didn't have any grounding in this other stuff. And so the gospel issue thing is one that you do hear a lot in the church, and that we get leveled at us. We guys just wish you would just stick to the gospel. That's a total misread of what we're supposed to do. So I wanted to throw that in before we moved on.
The gospel is the good news of Christ reigning over everything. This is everything.
Reigning over everything is the key word there. Yeah,
that's exactly it. And let me just throw this in, as you said there, Jack. I'm going to pump our own tires here for a second. Hey, we were way ahead on the Disney thing, and now it's coming out even more that they are having, Will, you just sent that they're dressing up men in dresses and with mustaches and beards and everything else, and presenting as female characters at Disney. We knew this was happening.
For your kids to go take pictures with. Right.
Correct. Yes. To take pictures with the kids. We were way ahead on this one. And so I am going to pump our own tires there for a second. Get your kids away from Disney, please. It's not a gospel issue. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is, man. I like, to your point, Jack, they're turning our kids trans. To your point, Will, like, we're in the public school. We're not thinking about these things. these things matter. And so the gospel, I love how you wrap that up, Jack. Like the gospel centered approach sounds very spiritual. It sounds very religious, sounds very good, but in practicality, we're losing people. So I want to bring it back around to the next point and what you were talking, Will, about the importance of families, because this next movement, this may have been off the grid for some people. Like, I don't know. For us, we are homeschooled. All three of us are homeschooled. So, of course, me and Jack were brothers. So, of course, we were. But this was huge in the homeschool movement. So, I don't know. We'll get into this, how much
people
more.
are becoming way more familiar with it now because the Duggar documentary.
That's true. That's true. Because the Duggar documentary. It's the idea of the quiverful movement. Now, you have Bill Gothard, Doug Phillips. The Duggars are big ones. And
Vision Forum, which was Doug
Vision
Phillips'
Forum.
company.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Vision Forum. And they push this quiverful movement. Now, I don't know which one of you wants to kind of break down what exactly this is, but it is strongly focused on the family. So we're kind of switching back from this crazy love, radical, gospel-centered, go out and evangelize everybody to quiverful movement. Will, get us into that. It looks like you're ready.
Well, I was just going to say Vision Forum and Doug Phillips was a staple in our house growing up. That was one of the things. We watched his videos. We listened to their audiobooks. My mom bought a lot of their books for us to read, curriculum wise. Like, they were a staple. And I think they were for a lot of people in the homeschool community, because similar to the last thing that we talked about, there were so many elements of it that were like, yes, that is right. That is what we need to be doing. As far as the movement goes, there were kind of a lot of tenets of it. Obviously, homeschooling was one of them. They were big proponents that you need to be homeschooling your kids. Modest dress was another one that our daughters need to be dressing modestly. Sons too, of course, but of course, daughters, the emphasis was on more so. Big families, the quiverful movement that comes from Psalm 127, where it talks about children being a blessing. Happy is the man who has his quiver full of them. And so they were, correct me if I'm wrong, but anti-birth control, like basically have as many kids as possible type of thing, have really big families, big into patriarchy was one of. Yeah, the Duggars certainly took that one seriously, but big into patriarchy, and they were anti-dating. A lot of things. I just covered a wide range of topics there, but those were kind of the hallmarks of this movement that Vision Forum and Doug Phillips really pushed. Gothard's another one, of course, and the Duggars. And so, guys, this one is very interesting because, again, all three of us were raised under the principles of every single one of those things that we talked about: anti-dating, father's the head of the family, homeschooling, big families, modest dress, like check. Like, we agree on all those things. Obviously, with Phillips, with Gothard, a lot of scandal surrounding it, not to mention the Duggars. Of course, that's being now broadcasted to the world about how big of a mess that was. And so we wanted to talk about this one. I don't know if you guys want to provide a little bit more background anymore on what that movement was all about, because I just kind of gave a broad overview, but what did you guys have to add to that?
Yeah, it's very heavily family based, and Bill Gothard is famous for the umbrella picture of, God is over the husband and father, who is over the wife, and they're over the children together. And, like the patriarchy, submission, hierarchy, and all that. That's just straight up biblical. But because all of these abuses came out of this movement, people, and that was my critique. I wrote an article on the Duggar documentary where this is just what they do, is they take the obviously objectionable things and pair them with the biblical things and be like, well, look, this is all in the same basket. It's not. Right. There is a way. And I mean, I think I would say we are proudly the most openly pro-patriarchal podcast in the Churches of Christ. I'd have to check with Titus and Daniel. I think they'd be cool with calling Dogma that one as well. Focus Press. That's the only place you're going to get.
We're number one. They can be.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, like we're the two. We're the two.
Jim's number one,
right?
Yeah,
the gym. There you go. I mean, Focus Press is your one-stop shop here, right?
Yes.
Because it's a term that makes people nervous because of these abuses, and that's what people look at as, man, this father-dominated thing. Well, dominance, if dominance is involved, it's not what we're talking about. That's not biblical. I mean, that's very clearly not. But as Will is saying, what's his name? Doug Phillips had a sex scandal. Bill Gothard had a large sex scandal. R.C. Sproul Jr. Duggar was another big name. Yeah, as you said, Josh Duggar, the worst of all the scandals. But then Jim Bob Duggar covering up for him, which was kind of rolled into the whole patriarchal thing of this father kind of controlling the family image. None of that is healthy. None of that is biblical. And so it's very easy to throw the baby out with the bathwater and not ask, did they have anything right? Did they have any biblical principles that they were standing on? And I would say that they do. I would say that God is pro-family. God is pro-childbirth. That doesn't mean you need to have 19 of them, but because you look at it between the three of us here, we're not even that old, and we've got Joe's got number 4 on the way, and Will 2 there, 4 over here. Like there's a lot of kids running around when we get together, and so
Right.
that's not a bad thing. That's a biblical thing. I don't think any of us are angling for 19, but I don't know. There
Kind of
are
a long way to go. If that's
there's qualities to this that really
Sure.
just get totally thrown out by the bad that came out of it.
Well, I think that kind of the inner glee that you saw from people in the world, even some people in the church, that they would never admit it. It was kind of this glee when stuff like this came out about Doug Phillips and of course the Duggars and Gothard, of like they saw those people fall, and I think that glee, that kind of deep down, like, yes, all right, comes from the fact that deep down these people knew that a lot of these guys had stuff right. A lot of the things that they were pushing, the big families and the father and, anti-dating and modest dress, I think their inner glee stemmed from the fact that deep down they knew they had a lot of that stuff right. And the whole time they felt called out, they felt guilty, they felt judged because of it. It's the same thing like when, we were growing up and my mom would point out that would tell somebody we were homeschooled. People got like offended that we were homeschooled. It was almost like oh, so you're saying public schools are not good enough? And mom was basically like, yeah, pretty much. But you know what I mean? Like people felt judged because of it. And I think that was a lot of this with this whole Duggar movement. All this is like, they felt very judged and called out. And so when the scandals happened and the big fall took place, it was like, yes, all right. They felt justified, right? They felt justified to say, see, look how bad those people were. Similar to what Jack is saying, is like, yeah, scandals are really bad. Like that's awful. Does it mean that everything that they taught was wrong and bad? No, I don't think so. But I think that, again, because they had such major scandals and it was such a fall from grace, people felt kind of good about themselves that they never really bought into it in the first place.
You see sexual scandals a lot in the church. Ravi Zacharias, Matt Chandler, we already mentioned. Obviously, all of these guys. There's so on and so forth. Lots
Not
of
to be
them.
Slanderous. The Matt Chandler one, nobody ever said what that actually was, whether it was sexual or
that's
not.
true.
It was very weird.
That's
but I just want to make sure we're not.
He stepped down for. He didn't even step down. Like he stepped aside for a second,
2 months
and then
off,
2 months off is like,
who knows? There's a lot of cases. Yes, just bottom line.
But there's a lot. Yes, good point. I mean, nobody really knows, and we're not.
I just don't want to get sued. That's all.
Good point. Yeah, I'm just here so I don't get fined. I'm not trying to badmouth these people. I'm saying they look for that. First off, Satan knows how to attack us. Second off, what does that tell you? It's not just the church leaders. It's everybody in the church and everybody in the world. It is so ironic to me that these are the same people pushing transgenderism. They're pushing all sorts of crazy stuff on kids, basically pedophilia. They're pushing so much stuff. And in the moment one of these guys comes out and had a sexual miscue, boom, everything is gone. Everything is done. Like, how dare they? It's like, whoa. Where's the inclusivity? Where's the, hey, we're all, the polyamorous relationship. Why don't we just do that? Like, you don't get to have a discussion on these things and say, well, what hypocrites? They're preaching these things. Yeah, they're not perfect. And sexual sin, I mean, I've read statistics that 33% of marriages have infidelity involved, 1 in 3. So, and this tracks in the church as well. Pornography, we know the ridiculous statistics on that. These things happen. That doesn't disqualify you from ever being able to speak on something. Ravi Zacharias had some really interesting thoughts on God, really good thoughts on God. No, I don't believe he's a Christian that way, but he had some interesting thoughts on God. Doug Phillips had a lot of things right. So we instantly discredit him because of the sin that he had. It's like, would it have been better if he came out and turned out he was a massive gossip? Just gossiped all the time. He was like, those things aren't going to get that. Instant credibility lost. The moment they do this, there is. And yes, I realize it's tied into some of the patriarchy. They abuse that position. Patriarchy itself isn't wrong. Where did it go wrong for Doug Phillips? If you ever saw the guy speak, met the guy or saw the guy speak, which we did, going to a homeschool conference, you knew something was up because it wasn't the sexual sin that got him. It was his pride and it was his arrogance. Same thing with Ravi Zacharias. Same thing with all these guys. Bill Gothard. They're prideful men who allowed the prestige and power to go to their head. Your husband who's at home, who's trying to get you to submit as the wife, that's not the issue, right? Like, it's not a matter of pride where everybody's pumping his tires right and left and telling him how great he is. He's trying to do what's biblical. The Bill Gothard umbrella thing all the way down is biblical. So I saw so many Christians, the Duggar documentary came out, disavowing it and talking about Christians, talking about the danger of this and really getting into the Me Too movement and everything else. And I'm just saying, stop, pump the brakes on it. that is, first off, the way we handle some of these things is why nobody comes forward about the sexual sin in their lives. Nobody does, because you are instantly discredited and the worst human being on the planet. So that doesn't help. And second off, it doesn't kick you out of the church forever. What we want is to lead these guys toward repentance. And I know this is getting off in this, and so I apologize. This is a brief take, and of course, this is a hot button issue for me since I work with it all the time. I hated how homeschooling and patriarchy and the quiverful, all of the things that we, again, agree with were thrown out the window because of one guy's or these guys' sexual sins. Well, I think everybody has sexual sin on their own, and we're very quick to point the finger so as to take the spotlight off of them. Anyway.
I do have a thought on that, though, and that is that I think a lot of the outrage was that people felt, and they kind of were right, that the Duggars, Gothard especially, Phillips, they were telling people this is how you need to live your life. Sure, it lined up with God's word, but they were telling people if you don't live your life like this, then you're in the wrong. Well, then it turns out that they weren't living their life right in the least bit. Specifically, I'm thinking Phillips and Gothard. And so, Joe, I hear what you're saying, but I do sympathize with the people that are like, hold up, you're telling me that I need to do X, Y, and Z, and yet this is what you're doing to a 15-year-old girl? It's incredibly hypocritical. And so I understand the outrage. Again, I don't think that means, okay, we'll just throw all of their teaching out the door, because I was watching a YouTube video kind of rehashing the Duggar Gothard thing about patriarchy and the wives submitting to the husbands. And man, the guy brought up, like, I guess Bill Gothard never read Ephesians 5:21 about submitting to one another and that the husband needs to submit to his wife sometimes. And it's like, okay, you just completely lost all credibility for me, because that's completely ripping that out of context. And so it's the pendulum swing of these guys taught correctly, in my opinion, that the husband is the authority over the wife. But because they had their major scandal and their major fall from grace, now people want to swing it the other way and say, oh, you see, so that means we all need to submit to each other. And he brought up Galatians 3:28, we're all equal in Christ and all that. And that's, to me, the problem with it. But I did want to address, I think people were justifiably outraged because
let me get in
they were
here.
telling people. Yeah, go ahead.
There is a very easy, short connecting dots line to draw from patriarchy, male dominance to taking advantage of women. And that's what makes this so easy for people, is like, oh, you said you're in control of anything. You're the big man. And then you just go do this. Well, it's obvious what you were trying to do. You were taking power to abuse the power. I don't see a problem with that critique. The problem that people miss is egalitarianism, leveling up the spouses, leveling up male and female, does the exact same thing. Oh, you're an empowered woman. Well, you know what empowered women ended up in? Porn. Ended up in, these sites where they can go broadcast themselves, at Instagram, where they can post their bodies all over the place to go get. And so the egalitarian men, sure, they're just as slick in taking their position to take advantage of women. The point in that is not that validates or invalidates either of those positions. The point of that is men are very prone towards sexual sin and abuse of the people around them. They're going to find a way to do that under whatever system you have. The only way to protect against that happening is a virtuous patriarchy in which good men say, I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to let anybody else do it. I'm going to protect my wife. I'm going to protect my daughters. I'm going to protect the women around me. If I see another guy who's like that, I'm going to stand up, and I'm not going to allow that in my church. That's really the only bulwark we have against that, is a strong patriarchy. Egalitarianism doesn't have an answer for that. Empowering women always ends up in women being taken advantage of. And so, again, only one side has the answer. That side can be abused and often is, but it's the side that does have the answer when done properly. And so it really is frustrating as somebody who's on this side of it to look at those guys and be like, look what you did, man. Look how much of an uphill battle you caused us because of this. Because there are also plenty of very virtuous, strong guys in this movement who didn't do that. Vodi Bachum's still going strong. And again, these are denominational world people, and people don't like sometimes when we get into these names. That's an admirable man. I disagree with him on tons of stuff. He is a hyper Calvinist. I got problems with that. He's an honorable man. He has stood strong for some very important things, who also came out of this movement. And so that's a good example of where it goes. These other guys, again, I'm very upset with them that they set us back in this way. But as Joe was saying, anybody who watched 5 minutes of 19 Kids and Counting went, there's something up here, man. There's a look on all of these faces that is not natural. There's something wrong. I watched a Bill Gothard sermon way back in the day and was like, there's something up here, man. Like you get that feeling. And yeah, people abuse it. People abuse every system that's ever been put into place. elderships are abused, ministry roles are abused, fatherhood is abused. Like it's a sin problem rather than ideology problem, because again, the ideology is the only thing that can hold up against the sin problem, because God's made it that way.
This is my point, then we can move on. But I see what you're saying, Will. I specifically get your point. They were touting these things specifically, and they went against it. There is such a hypocrisy present. What I'm really, I guess, hitting on is, if we're waiting for the perfect man to get up and to live his life perfectly in what he espouses, we're going to be waiting a while. Like any preacher who gets up, you can rip his life apart and go, you preached on the sin of gossip, but brother, I heard you 3 weeks ago doing it. You just preached on anger. Well,
I disagree with that.
I disagree with that as well.
Yeah, I think there's a large difference between, number one, the Bible draws a difference between sexual sin and other
sexual sin.
Number two, like, I've got I'm not perfect versus I am blatantly going against this thing. I'm holding everybody else to a really high standard, and I'm setting the bar way up here.
The problem was
pride. I'm like running the other direction, right? Subverting my own standard.
That's true. I get that. The problem to me was the pride and arrogance of them not confessing, them not coming forward, and them not handling it. From what I hear, Doug Phillips is still trying to make his own way. Like, he never really did deal with that. Bill Gothard's completely fallen off the map. Like, to me, it's less, obviously they're espousing something. I'm saying, yes, what they did was egregious. What they did was wrong. It's not good. But if they had been contrite, and if they had said this was a major misstep, if they had done the appropriate things now they should never be given the same platform again. That's part of the consequences. At the same time, I don't know. I feel like the witch hunt, and we had cancel culture. The witch hunt comes into everybody in the surrounding. Yes, they earned it. They earned the witch hunt because of the stupid decisions they made and the sin that they were in. But it's the fact that they're arrogant about it. Again, we all knew this ahead of time. These guys were majorly prideful, and that they never tried to make it right. But it's everybody else in the vicinity where the witch hunt came for. And this with the Duggar documentary, they start pointing fingers at everybody. And I'm saying, well, is this guy sinful? Has this guy ever done anything wrong? That's the explosion from this. So no, I'm not backing these guys or saying, I'm just saying it created an opportunity for everybody to be scrutinized who has sinned, in my opinion, from the world, from those looking in on this movement.
This is the whole discussion of, well, all sins equal in the sight of God. Sure it is. That doesn't mean the consequences are equal in the sight of God. And I think that's the biggest, you bring up gossip. I'm sorry, if it came out that Doug Phillips was a big gossip, that's not near the level of consequence of this guy sexually abused a 15-year-old and groomed her, or whatever the terms are. I'm sorry, those are different consequences, and that's a caution to any preacher, anybody who's going to get up in a position of authority using God's word, saying this is how we need to live our lives. Man, clean your life up of that stuff. And again, it's not to say that you have to be perfect, because you will not be. It doesn't mean that you have to project this image of I've never sinned and I never will sin. But man, don't get caught up in a sex scandal. Like, to me, it's not that hard to make that jump of that's very different than somebody who, man, I let out a cuss word one time. See, I'm not perfect. Obviously, those things are very, very different. So that was the only other thing I wanted to say on that, because all sin is equal, and we don't want to cast aspersions on one versus the other. However, the consequences are very different. But I do completely agree with you on the sense that the kind of false outrage over it was a bit disingenuous to me, of like, oh, see, how dare these people? And it's like, how about you check your life first? So I get that. I'm with you there, but I do think the outrage was a little bit more justified.
People definitely took advantage of that. I mean, like they're going to. For sure. My thing is, if we're calling people to a higher standard, we have to live it and apply it to ourselves. Right. That's
I fully agree to that. I fully agree to that. We never did the Duggar documentary, so go back and read Jack's article, because he really did have a really great. I wanted to come back and plug that. Like, he really did have a great article on that. So if you're wondering, we talked about covering it. Obviously, it exploded on Netflix and whatnot. Netflix, I think, right? Go back and read his Amazon. Was it Amazon? Okay, go back and read that article. He really did have some good thoughts on how Christians should view it. That's what burned me the most. It's not the world. Well, and the world calls us hypocrites anyway. It's the fact that I saw multiple Christians getting on there, and yes, disavowing the guy, but it's like, wow, we all had to get on there and have this hot take of sure, that's horrible. That's horrible. We all know it's horrible. Stop piling on and giving the world all this fodder for Christians are nothing but hypocrites. Like, that's I guess where it's coming from for me.
Yeah, and I would say that would be what I would tell my encouragement to Christians, don't join in that crowd. It doesn't make it's the virtue signaling, right? See, I think this is bad too. Like, okay, big deal. Sure, we all do. And so, yeah, we've hit around it and then we can move on. But like, this does not mean that what they taught was wrong. It does not mean that what they taught was completely off base. Did they abuse it? For sure. But again, go through the hallmarks: homeschooling, big families, modest dress, patriarchy, anti-dating. Check. You know what I mean? Like, those things to me line up very closely to what I see in God's word. And I would strongly discourage Christians from throwing that out and saying, see, those are the fruit of all those things. No, they're not. That's the fruit of the abuse of those things. But man, like you say, we have a lot of Christians that want to be worldly deep down. And so they use stuff like the Duggars to say, see, homeschooling doesn't work. See, patriarchy doesn't work. See, all that modest dress stuff, all the anti-dating stuff's ridiculous. There are, we can get into the details and the nitty-gritty of those things. I would encourage people, don't just throw that out just because of the scandals.
Just sum it up this way. We weigh the flaws of this movement against the fruits of the other one. No. Apples to apples. Weigh the flaws that came out of this with the flaws that come out of everything else. Weigh the fruits that come out of this with the fruits that come out of everything else. And I think that's where you see we still are on this side of things. Its fruits are better. Its flaws are equal. They're equally bad, but they're right there. All right, we got to get on to the next one.
We are going to. I'm transitioning.
Hold on. I got to give my weekly plug. You said the site, churchreset.substack.com. The deep thinkers are all already subscribers, but just in case anybody's listening hasn't already signed up, but that's where the article is. Go ahead.
No, go ahead and get into your ad read too, because that kind of rolls into your other project.
Perfect. Yeah. A lot of books coming out. Last week, we plugged my new Mark study guide for Bible classes. Another one coming out. In fact, for people who didn't grow up in Sunday school, it's called Sunday School Catch Up. We have Starting Line at Focus Press, which Will and Brad wrote for new Christians, kind of introducing them to the church, the worship of the church, the doctrine of the church. One of the things I realized in talking to people is we don't have things for people that didn't go to Vacation Bible School, didn't grow up with the stories, Daniel in the Lion's Den, Jonah, like stories that might be vaguely familiar. And if the preacher ever gets up and goes, well, as we all know, Rehoboam did, we don't all know. We don't live in a culture where everyone grew up saturated in the Bible. And I've met a lot of people who are like, people assume I know stuff and I don't. Sunday School Catch Up is for you. And even people who grew up in a church that maybe it wasn't a very robust Bible class program growing up, where you just feel like, man, there's a lot of stuff I don't know. There's stuff in the Old Testament they talk about I haven't heard of. I don't know who we're talking about or what's going on with X, Y, or Z. Sunday School Catch Up is for you. It's not out yet. It is on pre-order status. It is in the works. We'll be out, Lord willing, shortly here in the next month or two. And yeah, it's something I really think a lot of individuals might benefit from reading, but also Bible classes. I mean, just anytime a new Christian comes on, they're baptized as an adult, take them through Starting Line. We're going to package these things together, Starting Line and Sunday School Catch Up, to really give somebody the background they need so they can feel caught up with everybody else. And so very excited about that. FocusPress.org, Sunday School Catch Up. Check that out. Put in a pre-order. It goes a long way. I think it's something that's useful to a lot of people, but it really supports our ministry when people get our books, tell other people about them, use them in their church. And so that's our plug for this week. All right. We got two left. All right. We're running out of time, so we're going to go real quick. Go, Joe.
Yes. Let's roll in. I will say we didn't discuss the quiverful, like our own personal beliefs on should we all be having 19 kids. We briefly touched on it. We're going to save that discussion for the deep end. So if you're interested, subscribe at Focus Plus. And yeah, join the deep end because we'll get into what we think on that. Will, you mentioned one of the hallmarks of this is the anti-dating movement. That gets us into this next one, which is the Josh Harris, I Guess Dating Goodbye, anti-dating purity culture movement. And I feel like we discussed this briefly on another podcast. I don't know if we got into it too much. The purity culture movement comes around, and what was it? I need to do the research on the date exactly, but I want to say late 90s, early 2000s.
Because I Kiss Dating Goodbye also came at the same time as the True Love Waits thing and the Promise Rings.
Yes. Promise Rings. I think of Jonas Brothers and people like that.
Oh, dear.
Like that went well. You know, the Promise Ring culture of like, we're going to wait. And this purity culture of, hey, maybe we should wait until marriage because everybody's being promiscuous. The crazy thing is when that came out, yeah, that was kind of a problem. Imagine that now. Think of the promiscuity taking place now and all the kids going LGBTQ. Like, we live in a different world, man. Just 20 years ago, how much things have changed. But Josh Harris comes out with I Kiss Dating Goodbye. And it was just re-examining, like, are we doing what we should with dating? Is this because dating in a lot of ways, and we harped on this before, is kind of practice for divorce. And so he was rethinking some things. And I don't think that was wrong. I don't think scrutinizing the idea of dating and looking at it going, is this the best way we could do it? That's not wrong at all. It ushered in a courtship movement, which is tied in heavily with the Gothard Vision Forum, Doug Phillips, those guys, big courtship pushers and patriarchy. This does stand separate, though, because Josh Harris had nothing to do with those guys. And from what I'm aware, I think he may have been in some similar circles.
Because he had his own follow-up book called Boy Meets Girl, I think. And it was kind of like his prescription for how it should be, where I Kiss Dating Goodbye was how it shouldn't be. So,
so that's kind of what this is all about, the purity culture and saving yourself for marriage. Can we all agree, hands up? Yeah, of course, that's good things.
Right.
It's the same thing as we've been talking about. Those were really good things to start. What's the problems, though?
So I'll go first and hand it to Jack. We did have a really good episode on the kind of the pros and cons, honestly, of courtship and is dating a good idea. And we came out and said, like, look, dating is not a good idea. Like, I'll stand firm on that. I'm pretty sure you guys are aligned with me. Like, I am fairly still anti-dating. To me, the biggest problem with this movement, and I'm sure we'll get into a where are we now, episode about Josh Harris, spiel here in just a second, because where he is now is, quite frankly, off the deep end. To me, the biggest problem with this movement, because I am anti-dating, I think we need to find a different way. To me, the biggest problem was it created this idea of, okay, if you do things this way, if you follow this exact recipe, step by step, here's how it needs to be done, your marriage will be great. Your relationship will be great. Your problems will be solved. And people bought that. And I'll full disclosure, I have not read I Kiss Dating Goodbye. It's on my list to read, but I know the premise of it. I know the tenets of what he was promoting. I know the tenets of the anti-dating purity movement. And that was kind of the message that a lot of people got was, hey, do things this way, follow these steps, follow this recipe. Your marriage, your relationship will be great. A lot of people followed the steps, followed the recipe, got into their marriage, and guess what? It wasn't great. They married the wrong person. There were a lot of things that went wrong. Now, they blamed Josh Harris, and they blamed the process. They blamed the procedure. I don't necessarily think that that's right. Like, look, if you married the wrong person, that's on you. However, I do think that this false mindset or this false idea of if I just do these things right, my relationship will be great is not necessarily always the case. It's the one size fits all. Does it mean that we should go back to dating? Go ahead.
It made promises it couldn't keep. It really is what it comes down to. It made a lot of promises to people that it could not keep because people are messy. People have problems. Right. People have hidden porn addictions that they didn't happen to tell their future spouse about. Well, they got in and go, whoa, I did what I was supposed to. This was the promise made to me, and it's broken.
And that's what we got into with the courtship episode is it's so idealistic. It's so, the bar is set so high up here. And sure, it'd be great if you could reach that. It'd be great if you could go to the dad and do all these things. That's just not how a lot of people operate. And so, again, does it mean we need to go back to one-on-one dates by ourselves in the car? No, I don't think so. But I think it left a lot to be desired. And it did fool a lot of people into thinking, well, I just have to do things this way and then I'll be good to go. That simply wasn't the case. Jack?
There's just so much casualness, and we're in such a different cultural moment that you have to understand that, like, casual dating of, I'll just go out with somebody new every week. That was a thing. And I mean, you watch the TV shows back then, Seinfeld, every episode, Jerry's got a new girlfriend, and people almost were that way of, I'll just try this person. You'd see somebody, the boyfriend or girlfriend for 2 or 3 months, and then another one, and then another one, another one. It's like, this is not healthy for anybody involved. And one of the things that, and you still see this some, but it's just insane, is you see, people, with their 10-year-old. Yep, that's her boyfriend. Like, your 10-year-old girl does not need a boyfriend. What are you thinking? Right. And so that was a very needed critique of I Kiss Dating Goodbye. And the famous, I guess, lingering image from the book was the one about at your wedding, or you having a dream about your wedding, and your wife is standing up there, and behind her is a trail of all the guys she kissed and dated and slept with and whatever else, and you've got your own string of women behind you, and like that you're bringing that baggage into your marriage, and some people thought that's not fair, that's over the top. There's some usefulness to that.
It's a great premise. Yeah.
Yeah. Because in your marriage, you're going to start comparing. Oh, well, you know what? He left his clothes on the floor and didn't put in the laundry basket. I bet so-and-so wouldn't have done that. Like you are creating this baggage. And so it was a fair critique. On the other side, an unmarried 21-year-old was probably not the guy to write the book. I think, we kind of have this debate internally where I'm kind of like, we shouldn't do parenting episodes. We're a bunch of knuckleheads. And you guys are like, well, there's some principle. We did the gentle parenting one, which I think was pretty good in itself, but I don't want to go too far down that road because there's an expertise there that some people are going to have that maybe I'm not. I really feel like that was the thing with Josh Harris is all very theoretical. And so lots of valid critiques. The I don't know, the alternative was being fleshed out in real time. It was still very much being constructed, and that's where you saw it go a bunch of different directions, and true love waits and courtship and whatever different directions that it took. We sell Engage here at Focus Press, which Dr. Brad Harrod and Rob Whitaker wrote together on courtship and rethinking how we walk down the aisle, I think is what they called it.
Both of whom had been married for 15 plus years when the book was written, so a little different. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And so it was a movement that needed kicking off, but also needed time to breathe. And maybe because that book was so big, so much of it centered on that book rather than what followed after. And I think what followed after was a lot of good stuff. Now, Josh Harris, sadly, way off the trail.
Not part of the good
point.
stuff that followed. Yeah.
Right. I mean, the fruit there is bad in itself. But on the other hand, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Those critiques, there was a lot of validity in them and they stuck well. And I think they drove some good change. I think, again, he didn't have all the answers. We shouldn't have been looking to him for all the answers as a 21-year-old, but I think some positive things came out of it. I really do.
But let me also say this, and I think I made this on the that podcast back then, the point that why did a 21-year-old write the book? Nobody else was doing it.
This is a great point.
People. Where were the older people going, hey, I'll take that one. Let me write the book on why
the older people were the ones asking the 12-year-olds, well, who's your girlfriend? That's exactly what the older people were doing.
And they still are. And so this is why people critique us and go, we got called on one of our recent episodes that people were not happy with. Like, oh, those young kids just don't know anything. Like, okay, I understand there's a critique there, Jack. You're right about the parenting thing. But what frustrates me is why are we the ones having to do it? Because nobody else will. Where are the older people standing up? Well, they don't know technology or they don't have the platform. Or, oh, I don't know. I guess you could kind of figure it out the way the rest of us do. So that to me is a massive chip on my shoulder. Like I get so frustrated. We shouldn't be leading these discussions. Full disclosure, we probably should not be. Why are we? Because nobody else is.
Why? How many older Christians do we talk to where they just kind of reminisce about the good old days and, oh, that girl I dated and boy, she sure was nice. And they say that right in front of their wives. Like, yeah, this is the problem. You don't see the problem with that.
To the parenting point, their kids are unfaithful. That's
right.
The other thing.
Yeah. Have a tough time writing a book when you've lost all 4 of your kids type of thing to the world. So yeah, that may be a harsh stance and maybe people get frustrated at me. But if the older people want to stand up and start writing books and podcasts about how we should do it, I'll be the first one to line up because I do that in the denominational world. People get ticked at me in the Church of Christ. You can't read denomination. Yes, you can. If people in Church of Christ were doing it, we do it. There's a few out there, right? The Colley's got some things and such, but overall, like we just don't have, in terms of older Christians writing parenting books and marriage books and things like, we don't have a lot in the church. Somebody's going to have to step up and start doing this. So that's a brief soapbox. As far as it goes with the I Kiss Dating Goodbye, same principle. The principle was right. The way that it was taken, the false promises, everybody getting upset, that this wasn't it, and then they blame the movement. Don't blame the movement. Like
right.
The movement was a skeletal structure. It was not the flesh and bones. Like it was not the flesh, rather. It was not the skin. It was not everything else, the vital organs. It was just the skeletal structure of this is what we think would be really good going forward. That part's not wrong. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's recognize that there were some very good tenets to that. It just went very, very poorly. In practicality in some people's lives, I should say. And then they blamed the movement and blamed Josh Harris, and he blamed himself and disavowed the book and is a nut job and left his wife and everything else. Just because he did that doesn't mean that what he did, back to the Doug Phillips, doesn't mean that what he taught was completely off the deep end.
Joe, to your point, and Jack, then you can take us, home, I guess, if we're ready to wrap up. To Josh Harris's defense, he questions standard practices. And I think that is something, Joe, to your point, why aren't a lot of older people doing that? That is something we need to be doing with our schooling methods and raising our kids, with our dating methods, with all these things. We need to be questioning. We need to be looking at it going, a lot of kids are sleeping with their boyfriend, girlfriend. Maybe we should consider a way to prevent that, hopefully. Yeah, a lot of kids are buying into wokeism and kind of leaving the church. Maybe we should consider where they spend, 12 years of their life. So I do think that there is a lot of value in younger people questioning standard practices because older people typically don't. Problem is, like you guys brought up, younger people are going to be the ones like Josh Harris who are more prone to kind of get some things wrong because they don't have the wisdom and the experience. But I did want to shout that out because, look, we got to question these things. And Josh Harris did, to his credit.
Yeah. We had another one on the outline, Promise Keepers, the men's movement in the 90s. Some people might remember that. It was a gigantic thing. I think their biggest rally had like 600,000 men come out for it. And so it was something. However, we've been talking about for a while, revisiting the masculinity episode we did last year, or adding on to it. I think it'd be good to save that for that. Talk about some of the movements in masculinity. This is stuff you guys do on the Godly Young Men podcast all the time. But I think it's time for another Think Deeper, deep dive into masculinity.
Plus, we ranted too long about Doug Phillips. So.
We did. We debated too much on that. The other thing being that was that arc of masculinity, femininity, and kind of there's 3 or 4 episodes. That's the most cited one we get from people is, man, that was amazing when you did that. I learned so much from that. We learned so much from it. I mean, like that's really useful stuff, I think. And so let's save that one for that. We've got some great stuff for the deep end about the Quiverful, 19 kids and counting, things like that. So Focus Plus, focuspress.org/plus if you want to get in on that and everything else going up there. Again, pre-order the new book, Sunday School Catch Up. The Mark Study Guide pre-order is also there. Will, you had something?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know we got to wrap. Joe had a really good point last week that I wanted him or one of you guys to kind of end this episode with, because it's the idea of, okay, why does this stuff matter? We're in the Church of Christ, whatever. This stuff, resonates with people. These movements, the Gothard movement, the purity culture movement, even the last episode, the mega church movement, the emergent church movement, the radical crazy love stuff. This resonates with people for a reason. And this is why it matters. So Joe, I don't know if you want to basically kind of restate what you said last week, but it's such a good way to conclude, to wrap up this discussion on why are we even talking about this? So take it away and then we can wrap up.
I appreciate it. As Jack said, we were talking off air about it. It filled a need. He said it perfectly. Each one of these filled a specific need that we had. You look at the emergent church movement. Yes, churches were getting very stuffy and not helping the poor, not considering any of the things that the church historically, going back to first century, whatever it is, like we were known as those caring for orphans and widows in their distress, right? True and undefiled religion in James 1. So we had left that, and the emergent church says, we're going to go all in on that. That was a need. They were filling the need. Did they do it well? No, because they left doctrine behind. That's a problem. The radical crazy love we talked about. You have a lot of stale Christians. You have a lot of lukewarm Christians that are just comfortable doing the same thing day in, day out, not having any care or concern for their faith and for God. That was the need, and it was meeting that specific need. Did it do it perfectly? No, but it was meeting the need. The mega church one's a little bit more difficult for, but I think people they wanted to feel religious in some way, and it got them back into church. It made church more accessible to them, I think, instead of walking in. And I don't think that's a good thing, but at the same time, walking into a small congregation, all eyes go on you. Like, it allowed church to be accessible. The Doug Phillips, the Quiverful, the Gothard, that movement, there was a specific need for patriarchy that it was filling. Interestingly, a lot of the people that were following it were the mothers, and the fathers didn't always get involved. And so it's more of a matriarchy-driven thing about patriarchy, trying to push the fathers. But either way, we didn't get into that. Each one of these is trying to meet a very real need. They did it imperfectly, but that doesn't mean the need doesn't still exist. So that's where Jack's Church Reset, as we start talking and fleshing out the church, what we're going to go to speak in Victor Valley or at Victor Valley, those things, there's a way to do this. God created the perfect organization, but we need to give some thought to that of, like, before we write people off, go, how could they? Wow, that's so dumb. What were they trying to do with it? So that's just the quick wrap up. I would say is always judge it by, why would people follow this to such a degree? They're trying to meet a need. How can we, through the word of God, standing on strong, firm doctrine, begin to meet the needs of going out and taking care of the poor and the orphans and the widows, and going out and sharing our faith with others and being a little more gospel centered and thinking about how Christ can rule our life? Those things matter. Fellas, anything you'd add to that?
I think it's a great place to leave the 2 episodes.
Great. All right. Well, we'll wrap up there. I think we got another great episode on the books coming for next week. But we'll wrap up right there. Make sure to catch us, truly. Focus Plus, we're excited every time for Deep End. We got some really good content. This one will be a pretty good discussion. Leave your comments to the Focus Plus subscribers. Please leave your comments on this for the 2 episodes. If you got some from the first one, we'll cover them in this one as well. Leave your comments. We'll have that on Friday ready to go. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.